I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this video series. I have enjoyed making it. I can personally testify that in my own life, studying reconciliation, getting into the practice of reconciliation, whether that was based on ethnicity and race or interfaith dialogue, has been challenging, convicting, transforming, humiliating at points, embarrassing at points. But it's been a huge part of my life and my spirituality in how it has transformed me. And so I hope that if you're watching these videos as a casual observer, this is my invitation to you. Dive in deeper, put some skin in the game, invite somebody over, have them for dinner. It's not rocket science. It's not super hard. I've referenced and quoted several books and haven't really said much about them. And so I'm just going to kind of do a quick book bash for you, just so you can see some of the books if you are interested in going deeper and just kind of walking down some of the road that I've walked down and others have walked down. I'm going to start with a book, and he's one of the men who actually got me started on this. And this is a book by Rick Love, and it's called Peace Catalyst. I had the privilege, while Rick was still alive, of spending 3 days with him and his wife, Fran. I learned more from the two of them in 3 days than I did in several seminary classes put together about marriage and family and reconciliation and peacemaking. And so he started an organization called Peace Catalyst. I would say this book is very, very accessible. It's a great small group study. He has been studying and engaged in conflict resolution, with his role. His role has been very international over the years. He was the international director for Frontiers, the missions agency. And so he's been very instrumental in my own life, in my own development, even though I only knew him briefly. And he's now sadly passed away. Another book that I don't have a hard copy for in front of me is Francis Schaeffer's The Mark of a Christian. I mentioned coming out of a very strict church environment, and while siding on the right side of certain theological and social issues, it created a sense of anger and at points even hate for particular people. And so Francis Schaeffer's book, The Mark of a Christian, was really the first book on the topic that I read, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, where I could have the right idea, I could have the right theology, and still not be mirroring what God wants, not be mirroring his nature, not be mirroring his relationship within himself, within Father, Son, and Spirit. And so that one's a short book, maybe 30, 40 pages, and it's a great book on the mark of the Christian being love, obviously. One of the books that Rick recommended to me when I said, all right, Rick, I think you've convinced me. How do I go deeper? That's this book called Reconciliation. It's less than a finger width deep. I have to say, if you get this book, you can only read it one page at a time. You have to do it that way. Read a page or two, or he has like small sections. Just read a small section and ponder it. So he is writing from a Catholic perspective, and a lot of his examples are coming out of what the Catholic Church did during the colonial years in Africa. And so a lot of this has been documented through various movies, movies like Hotel Rwanda. And so he is very transparent in an unnerving way on the church's culpability in many of the problems. And he also has some of the deepest writing that I have ever read on the topic of reconciliation. I tend to think of the process of it or a strategy for it or something like that. And he really gets to sort of the spiritual heart of what is reconciliation. And so I would highly, highly recommend this one. Read it when you have time to sit and process and honestly maybe weep a little bit. The next book I referenced recently, that was Gracism. This is by David Anderson. He's a pastor of a multi-ethnic church. And honestly, I got it just because of the title. It's such a great title. I've often spent many years of my life as a Christian being against things. I just did a video on, was Jesus anti-racist? And I love the concept of we have to do more than just say, well, I'm not a racist. I really love that. But I really don't like the trend in Christianity, and that author is not writing, as far as I know, as a Christian. But I don't like the trend within Christianity where we always define ourselves by what we're against. I'm against this, I'm against that. I don't like, we used to have this saying at the church I grew up in, we don't smoke, drink, or chew, or go out with people who do. And so historically, Christianity has turned these little witty phrases and ways of saying, here's what we're against, without ever defining, what are we for? What do we believe? And that's what I love about this book, Gracism. He's engaging in the topic of racial reconciliation, but he's doing it in a way where it is very proactive of how do we engage in this with love, and obviously, as the title would suggest, with grace. And so he breaks down 1 Corinthians 12 into very simple sayings of a gracist. It just puts some really great handles on that teaching there from Paul, and it's a great way to both understand that text and to integrate that into how do we act in daily culture. Instead of just all of this anger that I feel with everything I see in the media and on social media right now, what do I do with that and repurpose that into love for others? This book right here, A Minicolored Kingdom, this might be a little bit more for pastors or leaders and teachers. It's a little bit more academic than the others. All the books I've referenced thus far are very accessible. You don't have to be a pastor or teacher to get into it. I feel like this one tends to be a little bit more academic in its focus. That said, they are talking about multicultural dynamics for spiritual formation, and so it does have a lot of really great things. One thing I love is it's written by someone who is white, Latino, and Korean. And so it's a very interesting pairing up of cultures and stories. They each get a chapter to tell their own story regarding race and ethnicity and culture. And so it's an interesting pairing up of stories. This book was also recommended by someone who's giving a talk who's Latino. He recommended this book when he was giving a talk on how can churches be more open and be more friendly to changing neighborhoods that are more diverse. And so this was one of the ones that he recommended. Earlier in the series, I did a lot of talking about multi-ethnic missions, and one of the best books that I've read struggling with this idea, he's not really talking about multi-ethnic missions, but he is struggling with the idea of what is the role of the North American church. So this book is called Western Christians in Global Missions by Paul Borthwick. Very accessible. He has a lot of really great cross-cultural lessons. As I got into racial reconciliation, I realized that my strong past in missions books and culture books and anthropology books, actually, there's a very nice pairing up between the two. So he deals a lot with the old days of missions were Euro-Americans going to Africa, going to Latin America, going to Asia, and it was very much us to them. And now, if you take those three places, there are more Christians in those three places than there are in the West. There are more churches, there's a bigger population. Many denominations that are dying in Europe or dying in North America are thriving in Africa or thriving in Asia and Latin America. And so what is our role? How do we become more partnership friendly? How do we become less power driven, where we're much less about kind of projecting our power and our influence throughout the world, and we're more taking a listening and waiting approach? It's a very, very good book. Highly recommend this one. There's one that I'm not going to say much about, and this one is CrossCultural Conflict by Dwayne Elmer. You should buy every book Dwayne Elmer writes. It's a fantastic book. I would say never read a Dwayne Elmer book when you're looking to feel good about yourself. He has one called Cross-Cultural Servanthood that will, just tear you up. And so his writing is very, very convicting, and also some of the most helpful cross-cultural advice I've gotten have been from his books. Even though his books aren't necessarily specifically cross-cultural per se, I mean, they relate to how do cross-cultural realities impact the topic, but they're largely on things like conflict or servanthood in a cross-cultural context. But they're not primarily anthropological books by nature. These are very readable. I have not said much about this one because, as you've probably seen on this YouTube channel, we've had several different classes that we've done where we've had people from 10 or so different nations teaching together on a particular topic. We've done a class on animism, on global theology, We've done one on urban missions and evangelism. And so in all of these classes, we have multiple teachers from multiple backgrounds. And so they get to bring in their insight and wisdom from their very different perspectives and upbringings. And this is hugely helpful for us. And one that's been on my heart for a while, and I've actually scheduled it multiple times and it's gotten canceled for various reasons, has been a class on reconciliation. And so I am dying to have my group of teachers back when we can meet again in person and we can do a class on cross-cultural conflict, reconciliation, racial reconciliation, all of these various categories, and this not just be from my mouth, but this be from many, many, many different viewpoints. In the meantime, if you want to buy the book, this is the book we're going to use for that class, and it is fantastic. It will really help you understand culture at a pragmatic level. We often understand culture intellectually, or we try to understand kind of these cognitive differences. And then we get into situations to go, man, I feel like I know so much about that culture, but I don't have any clue as to why that scenario went poorly for me. That's this book. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this series. I would love for you to comment on the various videos as I've asked questions. Just feel free to share your thoughts. I would love to hear back from you. And I do invite you into this class on reconciliation whenever we have the chance to do it live.